the world involving ancient civilizations that just defy anything we would have thought is possible. For example, with the Great Pyramid of Egypt, we still don't know how they constructed it. We have no idea how they hauled stones weighing as much as 80 tons from the Aswan quarry 500 miles away and then lifted and stacked them some 300 feet above the ground. There's other sites in Baalbek with the trilithon stones that are 900 tons apiece that were moved a half mile and then lifted and stacked 30 feet above the ground. And let me just, to let the audience know, that the largest stone moved in modern times is 340 tons. It was moved 106 miles to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And what I'm trying to say here is that the ancients moved stones that were literally 3 times as heavy. In fact, the Egyptians moved the 1,000-ton Ramesseum statue 170 miles. It is completely inexplicable. So to go back to your point, which is that how did they do this with alleged primitive methods? There's no known Egyptian barge that could have ferried even a fraction of that weight. And the academics claim that, things were moved with primitive methods, which has since been debunked, such as rolling them on tree logs and other nonsense. So basically what I'm trying to tell you here is that any grown adult that revisits the topic of ancient history quickly sees that there is a complete missing chapter of ancient history, such as what Graham Hancock has long said, that there's strong evidence that humans were doing things that were just mind-blowing thousands of years ago, and something happened on Earth to get us to forget this.
Yes, it's like, I think, does everybody, even scientific people and conspiracy theorists, do they all agree that there was a flood? I think we've all agreed on that, right, Jimmy? Or is that still debated that there was once a great flood at some point?
So this is an interesting thing. So just so people know, there's 500 legends across 5 continents around the world discussing that there was a flood that wiped out humanity. Now, scientists and academics will say, no, this is not possible, and they'll go on to say that it's physically impossible for the Himalayas or the Peruvian Andes to have been covered with water. But here's what we do know scientifically, is that there was something called the Younger Dryas Climate Catastrophe that existed between 12,800 years ago and 11,600 years ago. And in that time, there was a sudden and rapid rise in global sea levels of approximately 420 feet. And now scientists will debate on how quickly or how long it took for that to happen. But the reality is that when we consider that almost half of humanity lives on or near a coastline today, and that they believe that that percentage would have been even higher in ancient times because of the abundance in resources and ability to travel up and down the coasts, that if there was a sudden rise in sea levels of hundreds of feet in a short period of time, that would have been apocalyptic. That would have literally reset countless civilizations that would have been wiped out. I mean, to put this in perspective, we all remember the terrible Indonesian or Filipino tsunami that happened in 2004, killed 300,000 people. That was 30 feet. Just 30 feet. So imagine if there was something hundreds of feet. It would have been game over. So the reality is that, yes, there is scientific evidence that corroborates a flood. The only thing that's debated is that the academics will say, well, it wasn't that extreme. It didn't cover the entire planet. And I'm here to tell you, it didn't have to cover the entire planet in order for it to create legends across all the continents saying that, hey, something incredibly bad happened to our ancestors that caused it to be wiped out.
And it's so crazy because the way that they use science and climate change and this and that. And, I don't believe a lot of the scientists, yes, I guess you would say. But when it comes to our history, if you earlier, though, you talked about that rock that it's at the Los Angeles Museum of Modern Art. And it took a whole crane to move that rock. So do you get so crazy, Jimmy? And I don't know if I've heard you talk about this, but I see a lot of the Bible people talk about it. The people that are really into it, that the Nephilim, that at one point giants built the pyramids. Is that ludicrous, or because they say Noah was really tall, or is there some credence to that, or is that just, in your opinion, a fairy tale?
So it's interesting. Yeah, the legends of giants also span across multiple continents around the world, which is really bizarre. It's a really interesting thing to just make up out of thin air as a bedtime story, because that's what the scientists will say. Of course, there was no giants. Some people before me have suggested that perhaps they weren't referring to giants of body, but giants of mind. That they were basically saying that there was advanced people on Earth that were able to accomplish those feats. Now, you mentioned the Nephilim, and I look at when we look at the Neanderthal and Denisovans, they had cranial capacities that were significantly larger than ours. And of course, if you go to any textbook or any museum, they'll make them out to be dumb cavemen. But what's to say that there weren't people that were giants in some capability to have constructed these things thousands of years ago? You know, there's also conjecture that the Smithsonian is hiding literal giant bodies and skeletons in their basements. I have no proof of that. I have no, you know what I mean? Like, President Trump should release and open up the Smithsonian archives. There are like at least 6 Smithsonian archives in every museum that they have across the United States. And many of the things in there have been boxed up for literally over 100 years. Nobody has access to them other than people within their little clique. So the reality is that there were people doing advanced things on this earth long before we were led to believe or taught in the textbooks.
So it's literally like Indiana Jones, you know, they find the Ark of the Covenant and they just put it in a crappy box and just put it in the back of the Smithsonian. No, I'm gonna actually tell that to Laura Trump. Luckily, she's very nice to me. I'm gonna say, listen, we need to go and get Jimmy Corsetti to get in there and inspect all that junk. Well, not junk, but all that stuff that's at the Smithsonian. I'm so fly, I'm aligned with the planes. My grind so refined, I got no time for no games.